So the chapter starts off in the Lake Gosho colony, one of many colonies that we didn't get to see in this arc, because if you remember, I believe that there were about 12 or 13 colonies in the Culling game in total, and we only really saw about 4. Anyways, it's stated that while the Shinjuku showdown rages on, a girl dashes forward. And we see this girl, who looks similar to Uro, running and asking what's going on. Has he become desperate since the Culling game didn't finish? And with that being said, we know is Kenjaku continuing his plan from chapter 222. Because if you remember, Kenjaku told Sukuna that he was going to be hunting down the Culling game players while Sukuna fights Gojo. And we can assume that this is going on during the fight because it said while the Shinjuku showdown rages on, so it's during the fight. As the girl continues to run, she points out that all of the rules added so far were to prevent players from murdering one another. And she takes a guess that it was awakened sorcerers attempting to prevent murder in the game, which is mostly correct, but we know that it was our team of modern sorcerers, Yuji, Yuta, etc., who added these rules. She continues to ask if this is why Kenjaku sent the troops to the colony in an attempt to speed up the game. And we're aware that this isn't really the case, as we know that Kenjaku prepared the troops in advance and not as a last resort. But this allows me to ask, do you think that Kenjaku knew our team of sorcerers would enter the game and create rules to prevent killing and hinder his plans? Thus, he prepared for this by tricking the other countries into deploying tons of fodder into the colonies to substantiate the merger? Or did he just gather the troops from the other countries to add into the Culling game and create more chaos, unaware of our team entering in order to prevent the game from happening? Let me know what you guys think. We come back to the girl and she asks Kenjaku what he's after. Why did he keep all these players alive as cursed objects all these years, just to kill them off again? And Kenjaku's able to catch the girl with some sort of jellyfish cursed spirit, one powerful enough to catch and restrain her completely, meanwhile drowning her inside of it. And he says that the Culling game players are no more than just water and seasoning, and that he doesn't really care for them. This being a metaphor for every player that enters the game being nothing but a sacrifice to the merger. The girl responds to Kenjaku by using her hair to prepare an attack, one that really resembles Ino's auspicious beast summoning, and she shoots a spear towards Kenjaku, and you know Kenjaku just easily dodges it. To me, this does kind of confirm that Ino has an inherited technique, and maybe his bloodline of sorcery goes back further than we know, because we see sorcerers from the past using his same technique. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it, who knows. But something else I also want to point out after editing is that the girl closes her eyes when she's like fighting Kenjaku, and Ino puts a mask over his face to activate his technique, so maybe that's the same way she uses her hair as a medium for the auspicious beast to come through and use their techniques. But back to the chapter, the jellyfish freezes itself, turning itself to a block of ice over the girl's head, and Kenjaku says he can't help but feel wasteful doing this, which can imply that him having to kill every sorcerer may not be a necessity to create the merger, because knowing Kenjaku, you'd think that nothing would feel wasteful when you're creating the next step in humanity, right? Who knows though. Kenjaku flicks his block of ice over the girl's head, and I presume that it breaks and kills her. As we see that Kenjaku has eliminated her, we know that he can't help but talk his ass off. And he breaks down how exactly he's able to find and track everybody so easily to eliminate them. By being the one to apply the cursed objects and seals onto these characters, it wouldn't be that hard for him to find them. And even if he didn't, every player stood inside of the colonies, so it was going to work out for him regardless. Hazenoki then enters and tells Kenjaku that she died a while ago, and interestingly enough, Kenjaku can't help but talk to himself so much because he's been living for so many years. And I mean, this really does make sense. Kenjaku responds to Hazenoki, asking if they could be friends. The conditions to be a candidate for being my friend are 1, you must be equal to me, and 2, you can't be boring. In looking at these conditions, if we consider Sukuna to be Kenjaku's friend, then maybe we can consider Uraume to be Kenjaku's friend as well. And if that's the case, our boys back there are in a lot of trouble, as they'll be fighting a Kenjaku level opponent and Sukuna at the same time. I also think that this could imply Hazenoki to be pretty powerful himself because Kenjaku's asking him, right? And let's remember, we don't really know that much about how strong Hazenoki is, but I'll go over everything we know in a little bit. Coming back to the chapter, Hazenoki rejects the offer, and then Kenjaku just says, hold up. He pulls out his phone and pulls out Gojo's death on the live stream, which is hilarious. He looks at Sukuna and he's instantly able to understand how Sukuna was able to cut Gojo. And he says, well, aren't you having fun? This could imply that Kenjaku's either surprised that Sukuna was actually able to find enjoyment in fighting Gojo, or that Kenjaku isn't really having as much fun as Sukuna is, because he hasn't really achieved his own goal yet. Both of my guesses could be wrong, but hey. Hazenoki complains about Gojo losing because he knew that Jujutsu High would come for Kenjaku if Gojo won, but now they have to fight Sukuna instead, leaving him to fight Kenjaku one-on-one. And I've said this before, but I really do believe that Megumi fumbled hard with Reggie's team, as he was so focused on saving Sumiki at any cost. He didn't properly negotiate with Reggie and communicate that they both wanted to hinder Kenjaku's plan one way or another. I really do believe that Megumi could have found a compromise in that situation there, and Hazenoki moving from Tokyo Colony 1 to the Lake Gosho Colony just to take Kenjaku out can confirm this, as he really could have had Kenjaku come to him had he been looking to avoid him. Anyways, Kenjaku tells Hazenoki that he likely wasn't going to get help regardless, since he had deployed a barrier around himself and around Shinjuku, and placed countless surveillance spirits to monitor things when he isn't present. One of these things being the total sum of the cursed energy of sorcerers within the area. He states that even if one of Jujutsu High students were to leave Shinjuku, he'd be aware. And tracking by cursed energy even allows for Yuta Kotsu to be tracked, since he has even more than Gojo. And also, he can see everything that the cursed spirits see as well. Kenjaku was just ready. This allows him to keep track of Maki and Ui as well. And although I don't think that Maki is on Hakari and Yuta's level, she's certainly going to be Kenjaku's biggest threat, because her special traits allow her to hypothetically land sneak attacks much easier than anybody else could when fighting Kenjaku. And this matters because almost every fight in Jujutsu Kaisen is decided by some sort of surprise attack, miscalculation, something that the loser doesn't see coming. And Maki has the highest chance of doing this against Kenjaku under these specific circumstances if they're to go out and search for him. However, they aren't doing it yet, as Kenjaku does confirm this. Hazenoki basically says Kenjaku's scared of everyone, and Kenjaku responds by laughing and says please don't tell anybody that. And honestly, I don't really think Kenjaku is, he's just playing along. A sorcerer's a con artist, Kenjaku's BSing here. I think if he really had to, he can take everybody on. Kenjaku launches tons of cursed spirits at Hazenoki, asking him if he really thought that he had a chance at holding him off until they came in the event that Gojo won anyway. And as he backs up, we see that Hazenoki threw a tooth into the group of spirits, causing a massive explosion. One bigger than anything I thought he could generate. This dude's powerful. And as more come out in one direction, he throws an eye at them and blows them up as well. But pay close attention here. Kenjaku was so smart to notice that Hazenoki only had one eye from using the other as a projectile to blow the cursed spirits up. So while Hazenoki had his one eye focused on the spirit he just eliminated, Kenjaku sent more towards his blind spot where he can't see from the eye that he just used to hit his neck and shut off his reverse curse technique, eliminating the reverse curse technique in Hazenoki's body from the head down. As Kenjaku outplayed and defeated Hazenoki here, Hazenoki asks Kenjaku what exactly is the endgame here, and Kenjaku reminds us that he's forcing the merger to take place by eliminating all sorcerers in the culling game. Hazenoki asks what exactly is the merger, and Kenjaku responds by saying, wouldn't you want to see an event you've never seen before? If something interesting is within your imagination, would you not want to see it come to fruition? Is that not what it means to be alive? I found this part very interesting because it conveys Kenjaku's goal of the merger, creating a life form beyond humanity, is something that he just can't help but be curious about and pursue. In contrast to Sukuna, who seems to take the present for what it is and simply enjoy it, Kenjaku can't help but focus on the future and attempt to grasp what lies beyond it. And I believe that this is why Kenjaku will be the final villain, because he has a genuine purpose and a goal he fights for constantly, the same way our protagonists do, and he's truly passionate about it as well. This is why the only time we see Kenjaku not smiling is in the presence of Yuki Tsukumo, a rival of his in strength, yet she sees his passions as unreasonable. Yuki Tsukumo is the antithesis of everything Kenjaku stands for, Whereas she wants to sacrifice curse energy to protect humanity, Kenjaku wants to evolve curse energy to evolve humanity itself, risking it. This is also why he openly condemns Tengen, since she hinders the evolution of humanity despite physically representing this evolution. In a way, Kenjaku simply wants to take humanity to the next step, where Sukuna wants to enjoy it for what it is in the current moment. And I can't help but think that Gege put an introspection of the two back to back for a reason. As Hazenoki dies, he tells Kenjaku to stare at his own shit in the morning. And Kenjaku is like, did you seriously just say that, bro? But Kenjaku looks afar to see Takaba enter the scene, somehow finding him. He yells that he's headed to Hatodake, and Kenjaku is just confused, telling him that we're in Wate. Kenjaku instantly attacks Takaba out of confusion, stating that it's confusing as to why they have sent him out of all people, and that he shouldn't even have been able to find him, since there are none of Meimei's crows around, and the curse energy total in Shinjuku never changed. Kenjaku instantly crushes Takaba, and states that he only put these awakened players in the game to bulk up the numbers. He couldn't care less about anybody but Higuruma. But Takaba comes out completely unscathed, much to even Kenjaku's confusion. He says that he's never experienced anything like this, and his attacks do not work on Takaba. It's like they're forced to not work, as if the effect of his attacks are removed the moment they hit Takaba. And to remind you guys, in case you forgot, Takaba's curse technique is comedian. It's a power that makes anything Takaba find funny become reality. And it was even stated that this could rival Gojo himself. So obviously, Takaba's way more powerful than we may think, but it really depends on what he finds funny. And thankfully for us, Takaba finds anything funny, even the corniest jokes, so he has a lot of flexibility in battle. But against anybody, he's not really helpful because of one major flaw in his philosophy, and it's that red is taboo, which means that any joke that involves blood is not funny to Takaba, and thus his ability will not work. Which means that Takaba can't really kill anybody with his curse technique. He in a way has Toon Force, and this is how he's taking the brunt of Kenjaku's attacks without really sustaining any damage. Takaba begins to speak once more, and he says that there are many exciting moments in the world, but number one goes to when a side character steals the show and a chapter ends. So this is an editor's note. Something I want to slide in really quickly is that I think that Takaba, like his ability, made him appear and take over this chapter when it should be Yuji. Because the quote kind of makes it sound like that's something he think would be funny and cool. So I think there's a chance that his ability broke the fourth wall and made him take over the chapter. But obviously the chapter was placed in a way where it was like Takaba comes in at the end and then the side character steals the entire show. That's dope if that's really how it is. So for all the people wondering where the hell Takaba was during the Gojo vs Sukuna fight, here you go. And now honestly, that last line is kind of badass because he is aware of his jokes. So I'm not sure if he's aware of his technique. If he is, then we might just see something crazy. And if he is aware of his techniques again, it would convince me that he could genuinely defeat Kenjaku here. Not killing Kenjaku off from the series, but more so making him retreat. I do think that Takaba just stumbled upon Kenjaku by accident, as he has a lot of randomness to him. It's pretty feasible knowing how Gege writes. We open up with Angel talking to Yuta, Hakari, Meimei, and Kusakabe, suggesting that they should go ahead and defeat Kenjaku now, meanwhile Sukuna's fighting Gojo. And the fact that Angel, someone who faced Sukuna herself in the past, would even suggest that they split their forces for Kenjaku, rather than focusing all of them on Sukuna, and likely their best chance of ever defeating him, says a lot about the threat that Kenjaku is. Angel lets everybody know that even if Sukuna can be defeated here, if Kenjaku achieves his plan, then none of it matters. And honestly, I agree. I'm not saying that Sukuna is a good person or anything, but he is somewhat reasonable and a tiny bit chill. He's not the kind of person to openly go out of his way to destroy the world like Kenjaku currently is doing. I would even go all out on a limb and say that if the sorcerers weren't fighting Sukuna right now, he'd probably have opted to go home and sleep or something, or smoke Gojo's body on the grill. Kenjaku's actively trying to destroy the world, and Sukuna's just fighting to fight and likely help Kenjaku achieve this plan. but since it's a binding vow that's making him help Kenjaku in the first place, I'm sure that he wouldn't care to do this if he didn't have to. So I do agree with focusing on Kenjaku. Hakari brings up the fact that Kenjaku does need to eliminate every player in the game to even make his plan happen in the first place. And since he and Yuta are around, and will be alive fighting Sukuna, Kenjaku won't be able to complete this plan. Meanwhile, they're fighting Sukuna, because he won't, you know what I'm saying, they won't be dead. And Kusakabe thinks to himself, and this is pretty interesting, he says that even if they defeat Sukuna, they'll be wiped out regardless. This is pretty grim to say, but can you blame him for even thinking this? Kenjaku has access to a technique that our most powerful sorcerers believe to be impossible to grasp. As much as people want to believe that Yuta and Hakari together is enough for him, I just don't think they can do anything against him once he opens his domain, as it's an open barrier and would crush any other domain in the series except for Sukuna's. They have no answers for him, right? Kenjaku is simply too powerful to not be faced with everybody present and in at least decent health. And then another scenario is brought up. What if Gojo loses and Kenjaku ambushes us along with Sukuna? And they straight up conclude that an event like that is just too overwhelming for them to handle. They would lose. Angel even says that if Gojo loses and we fight Sukuna, then Kenjaku in sequence, we'd be fighting Kenjaku heavily wounded, and that's not favorable. Kusakabe then suggests that Maki is the best choice in this case. We send someone to surprise Kenjaku now. Which, if you saw in my last review, you know that Gege stole my flow word for word, because I was saying this exact thing for 2 minutes straight. But Kusakabe does redirect his attention towards Sukuna and says that we need everybody to fight Sukuna, and we can't risk sending anybody that's unreliable as an assassin in the first place. And that even none of the first grades are up to the task, and I agree. We don't know if any of our characters are really masters of stealth like that, and the only one who is well, gone. Kusakabe gets dunked on per usual by Meimei, and she says that his lack of skill is not her business. She's communicating to him that just because you can't do it doesn't mean I can't. And as they come up with no answers, Angel just says, you know what, let's send out Takaba. And after this suggestion from Angel, they are all shocked, asking what the hell can he possibly do, with Kusakabe mentioning that the only thing I remember from him is when his clothes fell off in front of everybody. And I'm curious to know, how the hell did that even happen with the use of comedian? Like, what was the joke here? Angel begins to explain why she thinks Takaba should be sent to fight Kenjaku, as she makes a disclaimer to everyone that is present to never mention what she's about to say to anybody, even Takaba himself, as it can have varied effects, even something horrible. She says that his curse technique is, and we cut away from the scene. I personally believe that she's explaining comedian to them, and it's nothing more than that. A lot of people tend to let common anime tropes from other series influence how they read Jujutsu Kaisen, so a lot of people are gonna get bought by Gege, seeing this scene thinking it's like a secret reveal to Takaba's true curse technique, that is something more than comedian when it's really not. We now see Kenjaku attacking Takaba relentlessly with multiple centipedes, attempting to understand what exactly is going on here. And Takaba in the front is acting stupid and making a joke out of the fight, essentially negating anything that happens to him. I love how the page is drawn with Takaba in the front and Kenjaku's face is shaded in the back chasing him. It's just pretty dope. As Kenjaku steps back for a bit and thinks, he begins to deduce how exactly this technique works. And as he does this, Takaba taunts him, saying that he can't beat him, and summons an American bandana and sunglasses on his face. Clear reference to Bandit Keith from Yu-Gi-Oh!, the champion duelist of America in that series. He wipes off the bandana nonsense from his face and guesses that the technique is the creation of phenomena. Takaba, with the potential to make fiction into reality with his imagination, is something that makes Kenjaku go on guard. Something I've noticed is that with users who have the ability to manipulate phenomena in this series, these two being Takaba and Haruta, they tend to be unaware of their abilities. And I believe that this is done on purpose because Angel makes it a point for Takaba to be unaware of the ability he has due to the effects it can have on the world as a whole. And I'm sure that if Haruta was aware of his miracle ability, he could have done much more dangerous stuff with it. There is probably like an inverse reason as to why these phenomena manipulators are just unaware of their ability. But before I go ahead and like confirm this mini theory, I like to see one more of these guys pop up. Kenjaku does go out of his way to say that his thousands of years of Jujutsu experience is not effective here. and after expressing his surprise in the fact that there's a player who can even give him this sort of trouble, he says that it doesn't matter, as every technique has holes within it. And keep doubting Kenjaku, but this chapter is about to explain why intelligence is just as important as strength when it comes to Jujutsu. Kenjaku questions Takaba's identity, and Takaba responds by saying his name, and that he's from Nabe Nabe, even adding on that he made it to the first round of a comedy television program. And Kenjaku responds by saying, "Isn't that program only funny because of how bad the comedy is?" He adds on that you were going to joke and say you got last if that's the case. Essentially what Kenjaku's saying here is that Takaba's jokes suck, but in a way that your one friend who insults you and then says that it's only a joke. There's a lot of talking in the chapter, so I'm gonna go ahead and simplify it, but what Kenjaku does is continue to converse with Takaba, for the sake of adding validity to his statements as a fellow comedian to Takaba. Since Kenjaku has figured out this ability of comedian, if he can convince Takaba that his words are valid when it comes to critiquing his performance, since he has an idea of how comedy works, he can eventually diminish Takaba's confidence in his jokes and by proxy, the ability of comedian itself. And needless to say, Takaba bites. Takaba seeing that Kenjaku genuinely knows what he's saying actually allows Takaba to gain some interest in him, asking the motives behind Kenjaku's actions, and for the first time ever, Kenjaku chooses to not talk his ass off by saying it's just interesting. Takaba asks Kenjaku a very good question, this question being, if there was something even more interesting than what you're doing right now, would you continue doing what you're doing now? And with how Kenjaku reacts to this question, you can say that he would most likely redirect his focus towards that. Takaba's able to pick up on this, and as he makes some writing appear on Kenjaku's face, he then says, well, it's written on your face. Takaba gets serious, and he says that he'll be using his ace on Kenjaku, and Kenjaku, understanding the potential of this ability, gets a little bit serious, thinking this can actually harm him. But Takaba cracks the crappy Wi-Fi joke that we heard before, much to Kenjaku's dismay. He lets out a sigh of disappointment and says, listen man. He explains to Takaba that the Wi-Fi joke is something you'd randomly find on a brochure at a coffee shop on the table while you're looking for the password to their Wi-Fi. It's just a crappy joke that somewhat fits the setting, and because of that, we can understand it. But the joke doesn't go over well to people at home, or essentially us, the readers, because we're not in a coffee shop. It seems out of the blue for us who are sitting at home, so we aren't going to laugh at it. Kenjaku breaks down the joke even more, and this actually hurts Takaba's ego as he points out that being denied someone logically that understands the jokes really hurts. Kenjaku eventually wraps it up and says that you are very conceited, and this reminds Takaba of his old comedy partner, who says that he doesn't have fun working with him whatsoever. And I'm sure that this is important to Takaba's character because even the characters on our side have pointed out that they never understand what he's saying and that they don't even know much about him. Kenjaku wraps up the lecture and tells Takaba to be more aware of his audience and elbows him, sending him flying into a bunch of trees. As Kenjaku commends himself for his excellent feedback toward Takaba, he also confirms the conditions of his technique. And with his technique figured out to the extent that we know of, Takaba's in a horrible spot. Kenjaku follows up with Takaba, and Takaba begins to genuinely get frustrated and lose his composure against Kenjaku, saying things such as he has no experience and that as long as anybody but him finds it funny, then it doesn't matter. This is in reference to his ex-partner. I believe that this ex-partner telling Takaba to quit and that he's not cut out to be a comedian all the way back in chapter 146 plays a huge role in Takaba's actions and responses from here on out in this chapter. And I believe this is why we're shown that tiny panel of Takaba thinking about what this same person said about him, about not enjoying work alongside Takaba. Takaba's arguing back against him, but clearly Kenjaku is the medium in this instance. After Kenjaku claps back, it makes Takaba challenge him to a face-making contest to prove him wrong, with the conditions of, if you laugh, you lose. This 2007 YouTube ass condition. But anyways, they engage in the face-making contest, and of course, Kenjaku wins. Takaba folds and gets rocked by Kenjaku, telling him to look to his right, and you can see that Kenjaku's actually having some fun fighting Takaba. Takaba hilariously slides backwards on his face. Like damn, how hard did he get punched? Anyways, let's focus. Takaba begins to rant on the floor and think about how it is funny that someone that looks as handsome as Geto, meanwhile wearing a monk's robe, and is out here doing stupid stuff like this. All of these factors combined together makes him admit that even Kenjaku's pretty funny. He begins to crawl away, saying that there are two kinds of comedians who are always on demand, those who are funny and those who believe they are funny. And as he convinces himself that he can still be funny, he comes upon Hazenoki's corpse. And this communicates to Takaba that he needs to be funny here or he will be dying at Kenjaku's hand. Kenjaku catches up to Takaba as he crawls away and asks, "Aren't you supposed to be a comedian?" Laugh. And as Takaba has seemingly lost the battle with not only Kenjaku, but himself, he questions as to how. He's reminded of his ex-partner telling him that comedy isn't fun. If we do not laugh, how can the audience? And he questions himself once more. Why am I a comedian again? And the chapter closes. Now, if I had to make a guess for the future, I believe it's going to go this way. First, if we go back to chapter 146, he was asked that same question he was repeating to himself earlier. This question being, comics who are funny and comics who think they are funny. Which are you? And he responds with, I'd say it's 50-50, but maybe it's 7-30. I'm not gonna lie, personally, I believe that since Takaba had asked himself this earlier in the chapter, combined with the fact that Kenjaku is breaking down his jokes and actually discouraging him this way, it's gonna force him to make a decision between these two, and he'll result in being a comedian who thinks they're funny, although they're not. And this would render Kenjaku's critique of Takaba's jokes nullified, and also spiritually prove his ex-partner wrong, by him being a successful comedian by the story's standards. Or, the 7-3 reference could be in reference to Nanami's critical hit, and every now and then, he'd be able to tell jokes so good that even Kenjaku would laugh, akin to a critical hit, thus encouraging him and allowing his technique to work again. I'm sure that Takaba will ponder this question when trying to understand why he became a comedian and why he continued to stay as one despite his failures, and this answer will allow him to continue to fight Kenjaku. As for Kenjaku in this chapter, not much needs to be said. I think we just need to bring up how his thousands of years of experience does give him a massive edge over other characters in battle, because being able to deduce comedian and find a counter for it within like 3 pages is insanely impressive. Simply put, Kenjaku continues to prove why you should never underestimate him as the story goes on. Truly a fascinating character. Welcome to Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 241 review and analysis. As you guys seem to have been really liking the format of me just focusing on analyzing the chapter and diving into the nuance of them in the past 2 weeks, I've decided to stick with the formula. With that being said, let's hop into the chapter, and please keep an open mind while we break this down. Because let's be honest, it's not what we want, however, it's what we got. We enter into the flashback of Takaba at a quote-unquote average university, and when we first see Takaba himself, he's not only seriously yelling at his peer, but making complete sense while doing so. A complete mirror of the Takaba that we all know and love. And as Takaba lectures his partner about being late and unproductive when it comes to their comedy routine, his partner simply apologizes. And Takaba thinks to himself about how his partner smells like booze and reinforces his disappointment, but brushes it off and says, let's begin. I do believe that it's important to take note of Takaba's character and attitude here, because it instantly adds more nuance to the funny goofy man that we know him as, and not to say that's all we've known him as, but we haven't seen much of Takaba before he obtained his ability. So I'm sure that Gege having Takaba as his serious and stern college student for most of this chapter is there to remind us that Takaba is a human and a character. As they both perform, Takaba is clearly carrying the act. Meanwhile, his partner can't even remember his lines. As Takaba waits for his partner to continue the act, he already knows that he couldn't remember, and the partner simply apologizes. Takaba questions him instantly, saying, "You don't give a damn, huh?" And the friend says, "I do care," and Takaba tells him to seriously apologize then. Express that you feel remorse and not just brush these things off by saying "my bad" every time you mess up. This then causes Takaba's friend to tell him that you're the one setting an example of how to be an antisocial asshole. Now the friend says this because Takaba's essentially accusing him of doing this with his light apologies. But I believe that it's also to point out that this brief interaction displays why Takaba just had a hard time with comedy in the first place. I personally believe that to be intentionally funny, you need to have a very good understanding of others and be able to connect with them. And the fact that Takaba just cutting on his friend from the start of the chapter until now, and then demands an apology after, displays to me that His social skills sucked ass. I can understand that his partner may be lacking, but this is far from how you solve any problems with others, and if anything, you're just asking to fight and make things worse. As the friend continues to speak to Takaba, he says that Takaba will not hang out with anybody. He won't laugh at anybody else's skits, and it sinks to him that the upperclassmen won't bully them in the first place. And this just frustrates Takaba even more. He asks the friend if he seriously thinks that him going out and drinking all night and showing up late to practice is really helping them out, and proceeds to list even more frustrations with their progress as comedians. They don't even perform twice a year, and when they do, it's horrible work. And how every time the friend speaks, it's about anything but their craft. Takaba says, use your brain, and the friend just says, you're jealous because I'm more popular with the girls, right? Takaba punches him in the face and says that he's completely missing the point. We need to take comedy seriously. And obviously this is a problem because comedy should be an escape, and honestly in my opinion, something that you don't really focus on this hard. The friend responds that doing comedy with him isn't fun at all. If we can't laugh at our own jokes, then why would the audience? Reinforcing Takaba's lack of connection and understanding of those around him. And as this part of his life clears up, he asks himself once more, why did I become a comedian again? I want to say that I believe this segment is there to display exactly that. Takaba has always had a hard time understanding others, and this is reinforced by Takaba questioning his path as soon as it concluded. We move forward a couple of years, and Takaba's reviewing feedback from a performance. And it's safe to say that there wasn't anything good on that paper. Ken, the manager who asked Takaba the 7:30 question in his debut chapter, tells Takaba to not stress in the feedback, and that it's essentially impossible to make all of the audience members laugh. But even then, that one person bothers Takaba. That one person disliking his performance prompted him to ask himself once more, why did I become a comedian? We move forward to another moment in Takaba's life, where a previous comic partner says that they should disband, and yet Takaba needs to continue. Why? We're already in our 30s, and many other people our age have already climbed the corporate ladder. They even have families that they're providing for. How much longer can we continue to do this? And Takaba later on repeats this question to himself. We now see him in bed, as he complains about being a lone wolf comic once more. Takaba questions himself, asking, how much longer? And the answer he comes to is until I've told every joke possible, and now we get into the good stuff. Takaba ponders the purpose behind his action to become a comedian. He remembers that he once said we should take comedy seriously, and this is exactly why he couldn't truly connect with others. He says that he was a serious and cold child, and that made it hard for him to make friends, and thus he became lonely. As Takaba began to make jokes, he was finally able to make friends and only entertain people. But he never had a true friend, a peer, someone he was close with. And this is why Takaba gets so upset with his partner earlier in the chapter. Because his partner refusing to take their efforts seriously makes Takaba perceive it as him rejecting his friendship, or not taking it seriously. Takaba is naturally a cold person, so it's more than difficult for him to express how much he values his partner in any other way but the work they perform together. Takaba revealing this explains why he was so shaken up when he found Hazenoki's body, as Takaba does like Hazenoki enough after their fight to try and make more jokes to him and annoy him, and this is why Kenjaku rejecting his jokes upset him. What Kenjaku did there was not only explain why Takaba isn't funny, but by proxy, explain why Takaba can't connect with others. And lastly, why he was constantly trying to make everybody at Jujutsu High laugh, and trying so hard with his jokes to a point where he essentially isolated himself, because everybody else came to write him off as someone who just says a lot of nothing. Takaba is hurt by this isolation. This isolation hurts him enough to pursue comedy, his only method of connecting with others far enough to even disregard his own potential success in the world. His obsession with comedy purely revolves around his own insecurities, and by making others laugh, to feel as if he's been accepted by them. Takaba says that comedy allowed him to make more and more friends, but never find a true partner, a comrade. As Takaba watches TV, he's shown the kind of future that he wishes he had, with the two comedians on TV saying that they can't work together anymore, and if they were actually serious about not working together anymore, they wouldn't have as much fun as they are now. And Takaba sees this and says, it must be nice, and begins to cry. He explains that, I wanted people to get to know me better, because if they did, they would laugh at my jokes, and I wouldn't be so alone anymore. And then we see two Takabas, a child one, and the one we know and love. And the child asks, what is even taking comedy seriously? I want to say that I'm sure Takaba finally outright saying that he did comedy to escape solitude is what exactly triggered the manifestation of his child self. Because the child Takaba asks, everybody wants to see the goofy me, right? Takaba has battled solitude his entire life, and desperately. So when Takaba points this out, the child Takaba, the Takaba who thought he found a way to finally connect with others, comes forth. This resembles the root of Takaba's pursuit of comedy, and his inability to connect with others. And now, he's finally observing it. You could say that he's confronting it, but I wouldn't use that word because these Takaba are still the same person. This meeting feels as if Takaba believes he's failed his child self due to never making it in comedy, or in other words, connecting with others. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is why Takaba responds to the child Takaba's question of everybody wanting to see the goofy me with this. No, I don't think that's important. That's all offstage business. It has nothing to do with the audience. I'm sure that this is Takaba finally admitting that his nonsensical, funny joke man persona isn't the answer to his solitude, and this isn't what allows him to truly connect with others and to find a partner. Although he initially believed this, and look where it got him. The child asks Takaba why he does comedy in the first place then, and Takaba says outright that he became a comedian so everybody can understand him better, and yet, I went and said all of that. He told Kenjaku that he doesn't care if he doesn't find his jokes funny, as long as everybody else does. And the reason this was wrong to say is because it indicates that Takaba isn't considering how Kenjaku feels. In fact, he broke the script to tear Kenjaku down in order to feel better about himself. He was completely disregarding Kenjaku's emotions and thoughts because he was upset, showing his failure to even connect with others. Although Kenjaku isn't some high school friend or whatever, the principle is still there, and it matters that it's Kenjaku because Kenjaku understands comedy to its deepest core. People will say that this is a filler fight, but it couldn't be further from the truth. It's a rite of passage for Takaba, someone that we've all written off as a funny joke man from the start, and Kenjaku serves as a medium for this rite of passage through being the embodiment of intelligence. As Takaba says that he believes what Ken said about it being impossible to make 100% of the audience laugh, he understands that he understood this statement incorrectly, saying that he wanted to affirm to himself. And thus, he took the words in the way that he can accept them and gave up. Takaba used these words to never attempt to push to make 100% of the audience laugh through his performances due to hearing this, but instead allowed it to give him a reason as to why he shouldn't improve himself when he doesn't get perfect results, because it's impossible in the first place. And he went about it this way because he didn't want to get hurt. He wanted to protect himself from the truth of his failure of understanding himself, connecting with others, and most of all, protecting his child self from isolation. He pursued comedy for so many years of his life, all ignoring the fact that he was failing, that all of his peers had moved on to better lives, and being abandoned by partners endlessly, all in order to attempt to defeat the isolation he's always felt. Again, I do believe that's what the child is there for, in order to remind Takaba of why he's made every action in his life up until now. I also want to bring up the fact that this introspective is very strong, as it touches upon the themes of self-improvement, empathy, and criticism, and encourages both Takaba and those at home to truly ponder why you have some of your behaviors, or why you have a hard time connecting with others if you have such a problem in the first place. And I think what Gege is saying here is to not end up like Takaba. Don't desperately chase a solution to a problem your entire life through outside means, but instead, look within yourself and figure out why this problem is there in the first place. Figure out why you pursue some of the things you pursue, and adjust yourself correctly according to the answer. And this is what Takaba does here, even when it seems like all hope is lost. As we come back to the real world, Takaba bows in front of Kenjaku, and this scene is especially important because it's the first joke that hits Kenjaku to his core, something he can relate to. And I believe that this could potentially be the truth behind Takaba's comedian. But before I explain, let's continue. Kenjaku states that it's such stellar and perfect prostration, and that it's taken him many years to reach such a level. But he then says, wait, what am I even saying right now? First, Takaba has done something that Kenjaku can personally relate to. Since Kenjaku brings up his life after seeing it, this displays that this joke did allow Takaba to personally connect with Kenjaku, albeit briefly and very loosely. Takaba's already improving, and not only that, it seems as if his curse technique improves alongside him, as it makes Kenjaku think these things without him even realizing it in the first place. I'm going to guess that since Takaba now understands that the science behind jokes being funny, or being funny in general, is connecting with others and being relatable. This understanding will allow the effective comedian to be triggered with much more ease, and maybe even consciously. So to correct myself from the previous review, I do believe that there is potential that comedian can actually be something far more potent than it already is. Second, it's very important to notice that Kenjaku is talking about a Dagiza in the first place, and that it took him until his late 20s to reach such a level. This heavily implies that Kenjaku in his first and true life used to pray to a deity, and for a very long time. And this can insinuate a lot about his current motivations of creating this merger that's beyond cursed energy. Kenjaku, when activating his domain expansion, has a certain hand sign. This hand sign being the only hand sign that activates the domain expansion in the series to be a prayer to a god rather than a mudra of a respective deity. Kenjaku does seem to be no more than a zealot who wants to create a god throughout this entire series. And his detail about his Dagiza seems to only confirm this even more. I even believe that Kenjaku will sacrifice himself to create the merger by breaking the binding vow surrounding it, but that's for another time. Takaba apologizes to Kenjaku and explains that he lied about not caring if he doesn't find it funny, even if everybody else does. He wanted to protect himself from the truth, and now he will do everything to make everybody laugh. He'll make Kenjaku laugh so hard that he'll throw up. That's his ninja way, and Kenjaku shows genuine interest, prompting him to try, and the chapter closes. Editor's note here, I also want to say that I believe the 99 out of 100 thing going on with Takaba may have also been a coping mechanism along the lines of, since these people don't find me funny, someone else out there will. So let me keep trying the same stuff until I find those people, rather than trying to make the people in front of me laugh. And that can be sort of a harmful mindset because that does give you a reason to not improve what you're doing. It makes you think that you're right, but you're just not in the right crowd. And for my final thoughts, I believe that this chapter is much better than the doom scrollers on all of these apps that try to make it out to be something boring and bad. Just because there isn't flashy fight pages in a chapter doesn't mean it's bad, so please try to read what the author is putting out here. It's a very powerful chapter with a truth that many do not want to hear. Takaba has declared to Kenjaku that he'll be making him laugh so hard that he pukes out his guts. Kenjaku starts up round 2 with the summoning of the special grade curse, Akuro Outake. And as Kenjaku attempts to attack, the cursed spirit is instantly struck with a truck and killed on the spot. I have a couple things to say about this. If Takaba clearing Kenjaku's amp cursed spirits with this much ease, he has to be a special grade sorcerer at this point. This was the same amount of difficulty that Yuki had with the Ganesha special grade that was amped by Kenjaku. And second, I'm going to take a guess, judging from what happens after this page, but the truck came in and instantly killed the special grade because it attempted to attack Takaba directly, rather than play along with the scenarios that he forces you into. This could also explain why Kenjaku decided to partake in the ridiculousness that's coming up very soon. And lastly, it kinda sucks that this special grade curse was killed before we knew anything about it, because it's always nice to know what Kenjaku has always had up his sleeves. And this one definitely looks strong, since it looks a lot like Fusion Agito. As Takaba crashes the truck that just hit the curse, Takaba asks his imaginary partner in the truck if he's okay. And then the imaginary partner blames Takaba for crashing the car. And this is when Kenjaku suddenly appears behind Takaba as another character in the skit, accusing him of drinking under the influence, and pushes him to breathe into the bag. I think that this would be a great time to explain what is really going on here before we jump into the rabbit hole of confusion that is this chapter. If you're aware of the Gojo Baka survivor theories that have been floating around about Jelly Jiggler and Gojo laying dead, and how this is a hint that Gojo will be revived, this chapter debunks this theory completely, as we know now why this entire mini-arc has been named Baka Survivor. Baka Survivor comes from the show Bo 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 Bo, and it's one of its series' opening theme songs. This entire chapter seems to be a huge love letter to this series, as it does follow the same exact sequence of a typical Bo 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 episode. A very loose plot that is slowly moved forward by tons of ridiculous, out of place skits strung together, and by the time all of these stupid skits are done, whatever obstacle Bo 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 and his team had in their way is defeated. Simply put, the entire Baka Survivor thing Gege had going on when it came to the names of these chapters were most likely building up to this chapter here. which displays the evolution and mastery of Takaba's curse technique. If anything, Angel never said the name of this curse technique when she was speaking in 240, so the true name of it could be Baka Survivor. There is actually some evidence supporting this besides this chapter. The first piece of evidence is in Takaba's bedroom during chapter 241. And if you look close enough, the only book with a visible cover is a Bobobo manga book. And Jump series have been referenced in the series before in a way that communicates that the manga and anime of other series are present in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. Such as when Daido had been looking for a katana to use and he came across Tanjiro's water breathing blade at a comic store or something like that. It's possible that Takaba's ability was inspired from Bobobo, and even how he made others laugh as a child, because kids tend to do ridiculous things like characters in that show does. I could even be reading into this Baka Survivor thing too much, but you can also point out that Takaba and Ken's conversation from 100 chapters ago actually lines up with the Bobobo sequences, because the characters don't really care to make anybody laugh when they do their skits. They just do whatever the hell they can think of on the spot, and it tends to be funny because it's so stupid, random, and confusing yet entertaining. I loved the Bobobo series as a kid, so I had to take the opportunity to talk about it here. Anyways, back to the chapter. Kenjaku asks Takaba to breathe in the bag as a breathalyzer, stating that if the fish dies, Takaba will be charged with a DUI. And Takaba notices that the fish was already died, and thus, he and Kenjaku magically teleport to a hospital scenario where the fish is now gigantic and they're performing surgery on it in order to revive it and use it for the breathalyzer. Takaba reports the consciousness level of the fish as FFX11, or in other words, Final Fantasy 11. This is probably a jab at the MMORPG because it's been running for a long time and is most likely barely alive at this point. Correct me if I'm wrong, I know one of my 20,000 subs has to be playing this game. Anyways, Kenjaku responds by pulling out defibrillators and yelling, "I choose you," shocking Takaba as he screams, Team Rocket's blasting off again. I hope you guys know what this is referencing. As we cut back to the two, they've talked about the surgery and now the fish is just somehow bones and head. So it seems as if they failed this surgery, and as Takaba laments his failure, he says that now he needs curses to comfort him since he's depressed, just like me bro. Kenjaku randomly turns into a woman for 2 panels and refuses, never mind, pissing off Takaba and saying that they'll decide this by rock paper scissors. Yes, this chapter is ridiculously confusing and it hurts my head as I type out this script and even read it, but this is also how a normal Bobobo episode goes. The two begin to dance as they prepare their rock paper scissors, and as they dance a bit more, they both land on scissors and somehow land the scissors in each other's noses. Here, we see that Kenjaku has actually taken some damage from a scenario, which makes Takaba even more impressive. As Kenjaku slides back, he points out that Takaba's technique does not only take Takaba's imagination into consideration, but his own, allowing both of their souls to resonate with one another as they battle. Now they're suddenly in a game show, and as Takaba tells Kenjaku to not expect him to pretend to not know the answers for the sake of the show, Kenjaku says likewise. He dislikes that anyways, idiots acting like idiots. And me personally, I agree. The host asks both contestants a question, and Kenjaku gets it wrong, with Takaba calling him an idiot. It was a question about history too, so Kenjaku real stupid for getting that wrong. He's been alive for 1,000 years. Then another question comes up, this time the topic being about science. Meanwhile, Kenjaku seems to get it correct, he buzzed too early, so it doesn't count. And Takaba just didn't know the answer to anything, so he's just as stupid. And then Kenjaku calls Takaba stupid as well, randomly making fun of his dad for being an optometrist. And Takaba asks, what's even wrong with that? Again, if you needed to be reminded, not much is going on here, but Takaba's ability is forcing Kenjaku into all these scenarios that he has to play through, because if he didn't have to play through these, he wouldn't be in them. We move on to a different question, this question being, what is difficult to tell people? Self-recommendation or designated school recommendation? As the two walk towards the doors that contain the answers, they phase into another random ass situation, where Takaba's crossing the street and comes across a cat, only to find that this cat is Kenjaku. As Kenjaku jumps out of the street, a car hits Takaba, damaging him and changing the scenario to where Takaba is now a cat drowning in the ocean, only for Kenjaku to now attempt to save him on a surfboard, but little does Kenjaku know, Takaba was behind Kenjaku the entire time, crashing into him with a jet ski for revenge. As Kenjaku laughs, he tells Takaba that he's got him. and the two start splashing each other in the sea for an entire page. As they continue to splash one another, Kenjaku says that he hasn't had this much fun in 1,000 years, and that he's so happy that he started the calling games. And after saying this, he thankfully snaps out of the BS, albeit briefly, and pushes Takaba's head into the sea. Now, I don't think Kenjaku genuinely means this or even thought of this, but he's only going along with the script that Takaba has put out, because Takaba's intention was stated in 240, and it's not really to defeat Kenjaku, but it's to show Kenjaku something more interesting than his own plan in the calling game, to change his mind about the merger. So I'm sure that Takaba put this into his head rather than him genuinely having fun here. As Takaba tells Kenjaku to hold up so they can drink from the ocean, it's revealed that this ocean was made out of Fanta the entire time. And as Kenjaku and Takaba jump midair as if they're at the end of a movie, he thinks to himself, however, if this continues, I will lose. To him, all of these situations, these scenarios, are no more than a simulation, and all the damage dealt to me will accumulate steadily. This will not end until his comedic desire is satisfied, and this is not a fight where violence can reach the conclusion. Basically, Kenjaku breaks down Takaba's technique by saying that these random scenarios will not stop until Takaba's jokes reaches their climax. Again, similar to Bobobo, how these scenarios tend to decide the victor of the fight. After Kenjaku points this out, he takes the initiative and asks Takaba if he's ready, and they step out to a stage to tell their final joke, and the chapter finally ends. So I really do like this chapter, but it's just so random and there's a lot going on for me to wrap my head around. I get what's going on, but 2 weeks for this is kinda crazy. Still, a fun chapter regardless. I enjoy the Bobobo love letter that this chapter is as well, but sitting down and talking about it fried my brain for sure. Also, we know that Baka Survivor is completely about Takaba now, so with that said, I just don't think Gojo's coming back. First and foremost, I want to say that this was quite the shocking chapter, and definitely had what most of you guys have been waiting for the past couple of weeks, which is a hype character or moment just coming up like Yuta's appearance versus Kenjaku. And man, I do like how this fight is starting. Yeah, you heard me right, I said starting. In this video, I'll be talking about a couple of things, and not really the chapter only, especially since 70% of the chapter is pure nonsensical joke telling. There's just not that much to break down there, honestly. With that being said, if you enjoy breakdowns and pseudo analysis such as this for each chapter of the series, don't forget to check out my previous reviews and to subscribe for more content such as this. Let's hop into the video. The chapter starts where we previously left off with both Kenjaku and Takaba having their final joke sharing session in front of a crowd, and I'm gonna be straight up here. This could have been shortened into 3 pages at most. It's not like the previous chapters where you have a bunch of funny yet unpredictable scenarios and nonsense going on. It's just them talking. This is the first time I'm ever saying this in a review, but I seriously don't like this part. Anyways, you guys didn't come to hear me complain, so let's just move past it. As the two wrap up their final comedy show, Takaba asks if he was a good boy, and Kenjaku says, "You were the best. You were amazing, Fumihiko Takaba, and I'll never forget you as long as I live." The fight so many people have dreaded is finally over, and I have to say that I did enjoy it. It was a great change of pace, and Gege was bound to make something like this happen after Gojo and Sukuna's battle. Gege will always have some downtime in between massive events because he uses delayed gratification how he paces his story and how he writes his characters. For example, the structure of the Culling game. We saw Yuji for 6-7 chapters of his colony, and then we didn't see him for over a year in real time. And the audience was really happy to see him again when he came back, due to not seeing him in the story for so long, and couldn't wait to see what would happen next. Or another example of delayed gratification in the story was in the Megumi Sukuna storyline, and how it culminated into Sukuna taking over Megumi's body. And Gege started setting that up over 200 chapters before it happened. And then Chain wouldn't have hit as hard if Sukuna did it in chapter 20 rather than 214. We were waiting so long for that moment to come into play that most of us forgot that the Chain could even happen. So yeah, there wasn't any way that Gege was gonna give us Sukuna versus Yuji right after Sukuna versus Gojo. Gege likes to pace his stories, and it's good for both the viewer and the author, and you'll enjoy this much more on a reread, trust me. So we wrap up this fight, Kenjaku versus Takaba, and we're instantly greeted with Yuta just behind Kenjaku ready to put the hands on him. And Kenjaku notices this, attempting to react to Yuta, but Yuta blitzes Kenjaku and is behind him again, cutting his head off. First, I gotta say that I've underestimated this fraud since the very beginning. I shouldn't even be calling him fraud anymore. I get that Kenjaku maybe weakened due to his fight with Takaba and was caught off guard and all that, but the 5-minute merchant pulled this off against Kenjaku, not against some fodder, not against anybody else. Blitzing a weakened Kenjaku is still impressive as hell, and it looks cool too. This double spread alone moved Yuta a couple of spots up my favorite characters list, but you guys know that it really doesn't take much to do so because you guys can tell I hate most of the characters in this series. Anyways, as Kenjaku's head flies off, he asks why he wasn't able to see Yuta despite placing all of his curses around Japan on surveillance, and this was due to Takaba's ability. Takaba did not want his comedy session to be interrupted by anybody when fighting Kenjaku, so it didn't allow Kenjaku to focus or even be aware of anything but Takaba himself. It's quite the interesting twist. The question I have about this is whether or not Takaba activated this ability before his second round with Kenjaku. This is when he decided that he'd make Kenjaku laugh no matter what, since that's when Takaba became super passionate about his comedy and decided to focus everything on making Kenjaku laugh, or if it was always like this from the start of the fight just due to its ability. I'll guess the latter, but you guys let me know what you think. As Kenjaku lies on the ground, he asks Yuta if it was always his plan to have Takaba scramble his surveillance through Takaba's ability, and Yuta says yes, as Takaba's ability does not allow him to kill people. And if you remember, this is in reference to when Takaba was fighting Hazenoki and said that red is prohibited in his jokes. Kenjaku states that he was halfway to achieving his goal after 1,000 years halfway, bro, and that it's a shame, since his will be inherited and the chapter ends. Okay, so I'm gonna get this out the way ASAP. I think we all know that Kenjaku himself isn't done here. It's Kenjaku, and it's been stated that he's been defeated in the past a couple of times, yet always managed to worm his way back into this world, so I can't really see its end here. If anything, I believe that the fight's only beginning. If you remember, Toji Fushiguro refused to kill off Geto during the hidden inventory arc because he wasn't sure what would happen to all the curses contained within his body due to his cursed spirit manipulation. And as Yuta has potentially killed Geto's body again, we're most likely going to find out. If all the curses that Kenjaku collected decide to come out, this also means that Tengen will be released and run rampant as she was a curse under Geto's control. Not only Tengen will come out, but we're aware that Kenjaku has more special grade curses up his sleeve with the usage of Akuro Otake against Takaba. I do believe that this is what Kenjaku means by his will live on, since he will no longer need to fulfill the binding vow to summon Tengen at this point, since his body will die and forcefully summon her. Kenjaku is no fool though, and has been a sorcerer for over 1,000 years. And as Reggie Starr once said, sorcerers are no more than con artists. Kenjaku, being far and away the most experienced sorcerer, existing for over 1,000 years, will have something up his sleeve, so I'm excited to see what's next. As for Kenjaku hopping into another body, I'm definitely not going to rock with Kenjaku and Takaba's body, but I will say it kind of works. Takaba, in all honesty, looks like a Monkey King and Geto looks like a Buddha, so, you know, Kenjaku going from Geto to Takaba would be symbolic, and Takaba's abilities do resemble some Wukong's in their ridiculousness and reality manipulation, so that's all I see from that theory, but I'm still hoping it doesn't happen. You guys let me know whether or not you think Kenjaku versus Yuta is only beginning in the comments below, as I am curious to see what you guys think of my predictions here, and if you want to see an alternative prediction, go watch my video, Kenjaku Cannot Lose, where I theorize how Kenjaku would win in even circumstances such as this, which is crazy because I dropped that video like 5 days ago. Also, Maki not being shown on either battlefield yet really makes me believe that she'll show up to help Yuta with whatever's coming next in the later chapters. This being another reason why I don't think Kenjaku is really done yet. But to be fair, she could be fighting with Yuji and those over there, since they do seem to need all the help they can get. Hakari, Yuji, and Higuruma versus Sukuna and Uraume just isn't enough. I don't care what strategy they got or whatever is lined up. Sukuna is handling all three of them like he is Omni-Man, even without cursed energy. They need more. As for Takaba, I don't know if bro is dead, asleep, whatever. I've seen some people guessing that he may have actually died here, but we're just gonna have to see. And Yuta said that Takaba's technique doesn't allow him to kill, but he killed a cursed technique with the truck he summoned in the previous chapter. So I'm not sure if that's some sort of loophole or whatever, but that's, you know, hey man, if that's how he's gonna be killing people, I'm down with it. And as for Yuta, people will complain about Yuta not fighting Kenjaku straight up in this chapter and clown him for sneaking Kenjaku. But Jujutsu Kaisen has never really been about fair fights. I know I say this in almost every video, but 95% of fights in Jujutsu Kaisen are decided by sneak attacks or miscalculations. Things like this are bound to happen in this series, especially to someone who is able to defeat Yuki and Choso at the same time. People used to complain about characters announcing their attacks in anime all the time, and now we have the opposite. It's just funny to think about. With that being said, this chapter was absolutely solid. I believe that the boring first half was meant to build up to Yuta's shocking appearance. So I will let it slide, King God Geigakatami. If you guys watched all the way through, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything, I appreciate all the support. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.